Hey there, Whitney here. So today, where I live, it is going to be over 100 degrees and it is going to stay there for the next 3 days. So I thought it would be good to talk about things that you can do when it's going to be really, really hot to make sure that your garden and your plants are still going to thrive. So today is not a watering day. I typically water really deep every other day, get my plants to really establish a good root system. And a root system is definitely going to be the number one thing to help when you do get super hot days. If your plants have deep root systems and they can search for water, that's obviously going to be the most beneficial thing that can be done. You can't do that in one day. You can't develop a good deep root system. So just a couple of things to think about when it is going to be a super hot day. I'm out here and I am watering just to help hydrate the plants. Not only is it super hot, but it's been very windy, and wind will pull moisture out of your plants as well. So I'm giving them an extra watering this morning before it gets too hot. I'm sure you can see it's already pretty warm. And then again tonight, once it cools down, I'm gonna come out and assess what is going to need more water. The hanging baskets that I have, I water those twice a day already because they are in a container and they don't hold a lot of moisture. Plus that container just kind of bakes in the hot sun. So think of that, especially if you are using raised beds. I have my plants in raised beds, most of them, and the moisture just wicks out of those faster than it does something that's in ground, or like my pumpkins that I have in deep wells. Those were still wet this morning from yesterday's watering. So depending on the type of setup that you have and also the type of plants, you need to probably check on them more frequently when it is really, really hot. Avoid watering in the heat of the day. Those little droplets of water that get on the leaves, they can actually work as a magnifying glass, and you'll have little burn holes all over in your leaves. That's not going to help them to retain moisture. So watering extra and then just checking on them. Another thing that you could do is some of those plants that are really, really tender to the heat, you may want to consider putting up some sort of shade, or a shade cloth. Or I'm not gonna lie, I have peas, right? It's crazy to say that I have peas nearly in July or in August, but I do have peas and they're finally starting to take off. I might be putting up a tarp or a canopy just to shield them from some of the heat if they start to struggle, because like I said, 3 days of 100+ temperatures. So make sure that you're checking on your plants. That's the best thing that you could do. Give them the extra water that they need, but do it not during the hottest parts of the day. You want to make sure that you're doing it either in the morning or in the evening after it cools down. The evening water is going to have a better chance of getting into the soil and not evaporating off as quickly. So like I said, twice a day I will be out here watering to make sure that things aren't dying and drying out. Especially where we just got back from out of town, and some stuff, even though it was watered every single day and it wasn't that hot, it actually, a lot of my spaghetti squash, zucchini, pumpkins, watermelon, things that need a lot of water, they already looked super stressed. So I gave them some extra water, and then now here we go into these really hot temperatures. So something to think about. You can see some of the plants do so well in these high temperatures. A lot of my pepper plants, here, let me show you. A lot of my pepper plants that just seem to be like, chilling, hanging out, not getting much done, now are just completely covered in peppers. I'm actually gonna have to come through and pick a lot of these off. But the heat will make your peppers taste spicier, and it can make your tomatoes taste better as well. A little bit of stress is good for the plants. I'll show you this tomato plant here. Let's get around here so you can see it. It definitely, because it's in the middle of the bed and it is hard to water, had a little bit of stress and put out just a ton of tiny little tomatoes. It also cracked, which I'm not loving, but I think it's gonna be fine. but just look at that thing, totally covered. So the heat and a little bit of drought stress can be good for your plants, can help some of those really heat-loving plants to put out more fruit, to finally kick into gear. Peppers need to be hot in order to do that. So, I mean, it helps in that way, but it doesn't help you if they just completely die. Some of my beans got too dry because they're in a raised bed right on the side, and they didn't make it. Okay, so these are the beans that I was just talking about. While we were out of town, they did get watered, but because they are in a raised bed, right up here next to the edge, this section of the bed does not retain water. And it's hard to explain to someone else how much water these really will need in order to thrive. You'll also notice that these other beans are really shaded by these zucchini leaves, and these ones are getting a lot more exposure to the direct sun because the leaves here have been thinned out so that I could actually see and pick my zucchini. So these leaves just totally dried up. They're wet now, so they won't crumble, but I did have to break a few of them off, and these guys in here, they just look pretty beat. So a good way to combat this, again, would be a shade cloth. Since these are going up a trellis, I could hang something on the trellis. Just be careful, it's not going to make them hotter. It's not going to reflect and trap heat. That's why a thin shade cloth, maybe from the top of the trellis over to the end of the bed, shading this entire section would be a lot better. Just keep that in mind. Even though you're trying to shade them, if you're trying to put something that's not going to breathe really, really well, you might just be cooking all of your plants. The good news about heat stress and just kind of a heat wave like we're going to have is that, yeah, you might have some damage. All of these cucumbers, when I came back, I did have to cut some off. There's some that still aren't bouncing back, but typically they will bounce back pretty quickly once you do, as long as the conditions can be corrected. So these are, cucumbers that are crawling up the trellis. You can see they have suffered damage. They were super dry. I lost a lot of fruit. I had to take off a lot of the immature fruit that just didn't have enough water really to get to continue to grow. But after a couple days of really good watering and checking on them, just being out here and making sure that they were getting what they needed, they have just exploded again. So the good news is, if you have a heat wave that comes through, do everything that you can. Give them that extra water when it is cool. Offer them protection if you can. But if they do suffer a little, they will come back. Most plants, as long as they don't completely die off. So in closing, the heat is good, right? We need that. Some plants need really hot temperatures and they need a lot of sunlight in order to thrive. So just make sure that you're checking on those things in your garden that are tender. If you have seedlings, you can see here, we have some carrots that are going to need frequent water and deep water because they do tend to dry out pretty quickly. They're just seedlings that are starting. Same thing with radishes. I have some greens on the other side that I'm actually going to harvest because this much heat is just going to wilt them. Also, a thing to note is adding a thick layer of mulch, as you can see we've done here in the potatoes, is going to help them to retain moisture and kind of protect the soil around them from drying out as much. I did also want to point out I have some things that would be considered very cool season that are doing surprisingly well. This is spinach. You can see some of it starting to go to seed. These are turnips. We've been using the turnip greens. I mean, just look at that crazy beast. And then these are kale. And like I said, it's almost August here, end of July. We have been over 90 degrees in temperatures, but we planted all of these cooler weather things on the west side of the tomatoes. So as you can see right now, they are completely shaded, and they will be until the afternoon. And then once the afternoon hits, after about, a couple hours of good sunlight, this fence will actually start shading this bed from the other direction. So if you are able to think about those type of things when you're planting, this is completely unseasonably awesome kale and you know, other greens to have, but because they get shaded most of the day, they get nice filtered light through these tomatoes, they actually are doing incredibly well. So just think through those things and take some upfront precautions, and your garden should be totally fine, even though it's going to be over 100 degrees. All right, well, I got to get this done because I am going to be sitting by the pool today. It's too hot to be out here.